So, you've heard that Frasier has returned and you're wondering if it's worth checking out. Well, you've certainly come to a place for that answer. Now, first things first, despite what you may have heard from literally every media outlet in existence, this new Frasier is not a reboot. It's a continuation of the universe picking up in real time since we last left off. Not to say that everything is exactly how we left it, as if things had just been on pause for the last 20 years, but we'll get to that a little later. At the time of my recording, the first 3 episodes have dropped, aired, released, whatever you kids are calling it today, and that being the case, expect some spoilers of those episodes ahead. If you either weren't a fan of the old Frasier or have just never seen it, I would absolutely, genuinely be interested in your opinion of this show, and as luck would have it, I've added a comment section down below for that very purpose. With that out of the way, let's kick this off with a new, old setting. We pick up with Frasier freshly arrived in Boston. Yes, that Boston. The one where we first met the pompous doc all those years ago. This brings me to a point that I think is important to make. This choice of location would obviously lead many people to believe that the show would be sliding back into a more Cheers-centric storyline. Maybe even blending the two worlds in a much more solid manner than when Frasier first spun off on his own. I am happy to report that this is not the case. While the bar is mentioned, albeit not directly by name, it doesn't play into the initial stories at all. Heck, my thought ahead of the series was to use Cheers as a new Vera or Maris, to have references being made to the bar, the things going on at the bar, but never actually seeing it. I have no doubt that as the show progresses, we will inevitably run into a character or 5, but for the time being, this is the Frasier show in a new locale. Its structure being completely built off those bones right down to the intro sequence and the transition cards between scenes. Now, I say that the Cheers characters don't return, but what are the breakout cast from the original run of Frasier itself? And that's a little bit less simple to answer, but in essence, Frasier himself is the only main cast member who makes the jump, at least for now. Speaking of which, let's talk about characters. Kicking it off with the man himself, Kelsey Grammer as Dr. Frasier Crane. I'm happy to report that he is exactly as you would expect him. Frasier is Frasier. His life has grown and evolved over these past 20 years, but he is still that solid foundation that keeps the show alive. If you were worried about all the changes, all of the character shakeups, all of that stuff, Frasier is definitely the anchor that keeps this feeling like home. Next up, our first new character, Nicholas Lyndhurst as Alan Cornwall. Absolutely the shining star of the new cast so far. While he's absolutely nothing like Niles, it does seem like the core double act will surround Frasier and Alan, and there were actually a couple moments in these first few episodes that felt downright like Martin Crane moments. Alan is 100% the one to watch. Moving right along, we have Jack Cutmore Scott, who's playing Frederick or Freddie Crane, the now adult son of Frasier and Lilith from Cheers, and then the original Frasier run as well. He is now living and working in Boston. He had a brief stint at Harvard before dropping out to work as a fireman. He is another solid addition, solid character in this show. Maybe not quite as sharp or witty as Alan, but he does provide that great other, that everyman perspective that Martin somewhat embodied in the original series. And in a parallel to that original father-son relationship, we now find Frasier unable to understand his son in much the same way that he and Martin were unable to understand each other at the very beginning of that series. These three do the significant heavy lifting and provide the most consistently entertaining elements. Next up on the slightly lower tier, we kick it off with Jess Salguero as Eve, who is most likely supposed to remind us of the Roz element, crossed a little bit with the old sitcom trope of the wacky neighbor. She's Freddie's single mother friend who begins the series as his roommate. She provides some of the more out there comedic moments, and I find her mostly to be a good addition, if not a little bit too much at some times, but so far there isn't all that much to write home about. And speaking about not having much to write home about, next we have Tox Alagondoye as Olivia Finch. She's the head of the Harvard Psych Department, and so far she's pretty much only been used to desperately try to get and then to keep Frasier as a teacher in Harvard. She isn't bad, but neither has she had all that much to work with. I think it's fair to say that we haven't had nearly enough of a sample size of her character to make a judgment yet. That's it for the middle tier. Coming in dead last, we have Anders Keith as David Crane. Now, I mentioned earlier on that we didn't have any returning characters from the prior Frasier cast, but this one is a direct connection. And boy, isn't it the height of irony that he's the one I take the most issue with. David being the son of both Daphne and Niles from the original show, it seems like from the dialogue within this show that he is meant to basically be Niles crossed with Daphne in personality. Mostly Niles at the forefront, with little bits of Daphne coming out from time to time. As it stands, he's a bit of an overzealous mess. Now, not to call out the actor or anything, but he's basically like a caricature of Niles. A zany Family Guy sketch version, or maybe one from a parallel universe where Frasier was still running and he continued to become Flanderized for the past 20 years. Something along those lines. That's not to say he hasn't provided anything to the first 3 episodes, but he's definitely the biggest miss. Here's hoping he can kind of calm into a much more stable character. Like I said, he has a lot of weight and a lot of potential behind him, so I really hope that he can become something special. That is it for our main cast. Sure, some guest characters have been announced for later on in the season, but I won't mention them here because they haven't factored into the show thus far. We've talked characters, we've talked setting, what about the actual episodes themselves? While I have to say that they're a bit of a mixed bag, ultimately it feels like the heart is in the right place. Episode 1, The Good Father, had the monumental task of trying to bring us all up to speed on the new status quo while also introducing us to every single new element in this new series. Not only are Frasier, the tweaked intros, and the transitions back, but so is the laugh track. There are a few jarring moments, especially very early on, and a few over-engineered contrivances, but they don't ruin a good parallel to the Frasier pilot, The Good Son, nor do they get in the way of what turns out to be a very, very, very touching tribute to the late John Mahoney. And I think that this does stand out as a pretty solid first episode. Moving on to episode 2, we have Moving In, and this is really where things start to stretch and to move out on their own. We get to see some good character moments and situations, even if the grand story of the episode didn't have all that much to do. The moments between Frasier and Freddie learning to coexist in the same apartment are nice, and especially that conversation towards the end when Frasier discovers that Freddie has told all of his friends that his father had died, a move that Frasier himself did all those years ago in Cheers. Overall, I think this was a good growth episode and showcased a little bit more than the pilot had a chance to do. Rounding it out with episode 3, First Class. Now, there has been a bit of a through line so far about Frasier's increased celebrity during the missing 20 years. Remember that he had gone off to Chicago to take a TV gig in the finale? While there, he made it pretty big and his show was quite the sensation. We also learned that he had kind of become disillusioned with this in a similar manner to his feelings in the latter-day seasons of the original Frasier. I am very thankful that they stuck to the Frasier format here. It would have been very easy to change things up and throw us a lot of cutaway gags, but instead, we took the time to spend with our characters watching old clips of the Frasier show on YouTube on a laptop. I know this may not sound like such a big deal, but to me, it's things like these that really prove the integrity of something. If you're looking for more in-depth and insightful reviews on these episodes, make sure to check out Hailing Frequencies. They actually inspired me to make this video, and they have some great breakdowns and a great analysis on what's going on in Frasier, so head over there if you want to find out more in-depth and meaty stuff. Ooh, I almost forgot to mention the sets. There are 3 main locations that the characters hang out within in this show. The apartments, which kind of seem to be in a little bit of a state of flux right now, the bar, and then of course Harvard. So far, none of them really seem to hold a candle to what's come before. The apartment is obviously going to change and evolve as Frasier and Freddie kind of come into a more coexistent relationship, but the bar is just kind of there for the moment. It's nothing close to Cheers or a Nervosa from the original. And while Harvard is fine, it doesn't really have the charm of KACL. Granted, perhaps I'm just jaded by a lifetime of memories and spending so much time in those other locations, but that's just how I currently feel about things. What a long way to go to get to the point. Is Frasier 2023 worth watching? I think that it is. It still has a lot of growing to do, but the potential seems pretty obvious even from this early stage, especially as the new characters start to come into their own and different interactions are presented. I only worry about the current landscape of television. Most things aren't given the chance to develop and grow. Hopefully enough people come aboard to keep Paramount happy so that this doesn't become another... Hard to be a nice guy when your reputation's bad. That's gonna do it for me. I didn't go into everything, but I hope this gives you a little something to consider. But what are your thoughts? Are you watching the new show? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Who's your favorite new character? Leave all those comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. But until next time...
It all works out.